shortly. Chris, can you send him a quick text?
Yeah, I'll message him now.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm sure we will have other parents joining us along the way. We are expecting some others. For those that don't know me, my name is Anne Humphreys and I'm co-chair of Suffolk Parent Carer Network, and I'm the chair of this meeting. So I'd like to start by asking our county councillors and our council officers to introduce themselves. So Councillor Evans, if I could start with you, please.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you very much for inviting us. So my name is Mary Evans. I'm Cabinet Member for Children's Services, Education and Skills at Suffolk County Council, and Deputy Leader of the Council. And I think it's let's see how today's meeting goes, but talking to Anne in the sort of the chat beforehand, it might be helpful to parents if we do some more of these so we can speak directly to you, and you can obviously then speak directly to us. And I'll hand over to my colleague Chris Chambers.
Thanks, Mary. Councillor, I'm Councillor Chris Chambers. I'm the Deputy Cabinet Member for Education. I chaired the PDP on alternative provision. I think that's really me. Judith.
Hello, Judith Mobb speaking here. I'm the Assistant Director for Inclusion and Skills. Sorry about the delay, but my mic's playing up now. I've actually got my wireless working, so I'll do my best to come in more quickly next time.
Thanks. Jamie.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jamie Mills. I am the Provider Development and Performance Manager here at Suffolk County Council, and I was heavily involved both in the PDP regarding alternative provision, but also the previous PDP in terms of specialist educational placements. Thank you.
And I should just say we were waiting for our colleague Jack Abbott to join us, Councillor Jack Abbott, who's the Labour spokesperson on Children's Services, Education and Skills. And you'll hear us talking about something called a PDP, a Policy Development Panel. They existed when I first became a councillor in 2013. They're cross-party working and they can be incredibly effective. Sadly, they were abolished in 2015 and we only got them back again in 2018. But they are a way of doing quite deep, intensive research work to change the policy of the authority. And this is what we'll be talking about primarily today through the two PDPs that Chris has led. I'm just going to mute for a second. I've got a door to close.
Just while Mary's doing that, Councillor Abbott's on his way. He's having a few technical issues on logging on, so he'll be with us as soon as possible.
Thank you for that, Councillor Chambers. So we're going to, I'm just going to talk about the format of today's forum. So we're going to start with some information about the Policy Development Panel for Alternative Provision, and we will then open up some opportunities for questions, moving on to the development of specialist placements. And again, after we've heard about that, there will be the opportunity for questions. And finally, permanent exclusions, and again, some opportunities for questions. And then we will wrap things up with any final comments and next steps. So, Councillor Evans, is there anything else you want to say, or do you want us to move straight on to the PDP for alternative provision?
Sorry, I missed that. I was just picking up a phone call.
So it's fine. I said, would you, is there anything else that you wanted to say in terms of opening remarks, or do you want us to move on?
No, I think I've just covered, just set up, explain briefly what a PDP is, so that I think that Chris, so I think that Chris and obviously Jamie and Jack and Judith has explained more about that, because it was a in-depth piece of work. It's one of those pieces of work actually was possibly more thorough because it was done during COVID, because they were able to go and visit authorities all around the country that you'd never have gone to see face to face. So there's a lot of background work as to what is best practice elsewhere was brought into it. So I think it's probably for Chris to lead off now. Thank
you, Mary. So what I'll do is I'll and you forgive me if this is sort of repeating myself, and you may already know this information, but I'll just run for just to give ourselves a bit of context as well. So I think it was about 2 years ago, I chaired a PDP that looked at special educational needs provision across the county. And throughout that process, obviously, we found that we were short of SEND provision in the county, but it also highlighted another problem, and that problem being that we had a cohort of children in PRUs, essentially, or alternative provision that shouldn't really be there, but they've got additional needs that would be better suited to special educational needs facilities. So could be communication interaction. Jamie, if I get any of this wrong, please feel free to jump in at any point. We formed this PDP on looking at alternative provision. It was a bit of a stop-start process to begin with because the general election was called and then the pandemic. But as Councillor Evans mentioned, it's something that once we resumed in the sort of early summer with virtual meetings, we actually quite sort of rapidly got through the work, and we spoke with, because we were able to speak with sort of provision providers and experts and whatnot from across the country that we just wouldn't have been able to do pre-lockdown because it was geography wouldn't have allowed us. But so we basically we worked with SPCN throughout the process as well, but we also sort of visited other authorities, one of which was Lincolnshire, which is rated as good or outstanding, I believe, in alternative provision in their county, and we just basically looked at what our problem was. That we've got a situation where there was a number of children that was sort of the PRUs was a final destination, and I can see that Councillor Abbott is waiting for us. There we go. So the alternative provision was basically a final destination for far too many of our children, and that's primarily not what PRUs were designed, or alternative provision, should I say, was designed to do. Obviously, it's meant to be a quick turnaround, find a solution and work with that child on a more of an intensive basis outside their normal environment, and then to be able to put them back into mainstream education depending on their age and their needs, of course. So after sort of speaking with some places like Lincolnshire County Council, we worked out that actually we could put certain policies in place that would allow greater sort of collaboration with our mainstream schools, with our alternative provision providers as well, that enabled children at different ages, obviously at different stages of their education, to come in and get that more intensive need, and then for them to have a transition back into mainstream education if it allowed. So I think Jamie, is there anything I've missed out from that?
There's quite a lot there. I think probably one of the most key aspects from our perspective was about ensuring that we looked at other local authorities that have perhaps been through a similar experience as to what we're going through at the moment. So local authorities such as Lincolnshire and Buckinghamshire that are quite similar to us geographically, but also have a similar or have experienced similar challenges in the past. So to see how they've done it and how they've done it successfully, to then sort of take what we need from their mechanisms and their processes, and then sort of take it into Suffolk, because it was really, really vital that we didn't just look at one local authority or one area and just lift and shift from there. We have to make sure that's going to work for Suffolk and for Suffolk's learners. But I think you've covered it pretty thoroughly, Councillor Chambers.
Thanks, Jamie. I think as well, what was one of the real sort of flaws in our system before this was that no one sort of almost took ownership of the situation. There was no sort of collaboration between mainstream schools and our alternative provision providers, and but no one knew what expectations were in place. And so, from throughout this process, actually, and lockdown again has kind of helped this, has actually brought us brought us closer together and has made us work better together. And you'll see through the recommendations that I'll run through in a few moments of where that sort of that greater working together, and that emphasis on sort of we've all got a shared responsibility here has sort of come through, and I think it shows in this policy and recommendations that were made to Cabinet a month or so ago, or a few weeks ago, whenever it was. So, Mary, is there something you wanted to? You're on mute, Mary.
Is this a good point for Jack just quickly to introduce himself? So we introduced him in his absence. Maybe we've got some people here. Jack, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Real apologies. I've the age of technical difficulties, unfortunately. So I was having real issues this morning. But thank you, and sorry again for my absence. My name's Jack Abbott. So I'm the opposition spokesperson for education and children's services, and I've worked with Chris on this this PDP on alternative provision, but also worked on the special education needs places PDP as well, which came before that last year, which I'm sure you're aware of, and we'll speak about again in a short moment of time. So yeah, that's me, and looking forward to this. Thank you.
And I quickly also say that Jack and I sit together on what's called the SEND Oversight Board, which is, and as a member of the SPCN there, where we hold the officers to account, see what progress has been made. We have topics we discuss regularly to keep things moving on at a pace. And Jack is always very keen to make sure that I'm making sure that everybody pushes forward.
Thanks, Mary.
Wonderful. So, shall I go through the recommendations of the Cabinet of the PDP, and then we can put sort of discussion point. We can discuss those sort of key areas. So I'll read out. Sorry, this sounds a bit robotic, but I'll read out the recommendation, and then I'll just provide some context to that sort of recommendations. So recommendation 1 was the development of an alternative provision commissioning board to advise the local authority on their commissioning decisions for alternative provision. Now this actually came through as quite late on in the process through discussions with our mainstream school partners and our alternative provision partners, where as I mentioned earlier on, there felt there was no sort of collaboration between the two, or between all the parties involved in this process through the education process. So we felt we're trying to encourage working together and whatnot, and talking more. And so when this recommendation came through from our partners, I wanted to obviously hear more about what their idea was, and what basically that they wanted was just a greater say and influence in how we sort of commission alternative provision and those places. And so I think basically what the Alternative Provision Commissioning Board is to support in an advisory process, sort of looking at the sort of strategic commissioning decisions. It's going to be, in terms of who is going to sit in that board, it will be officer led, I believe. Judith, do you want to run through more on this, or Jamie, should I say, just because I know that this is primarily officer led, and I don't want to get it wrong.
Yes, so it's, if I can come in there, we're expecting the first meeting of the board to take place in January, and it will be chaired by our senior officer who leads on commissioning new places and commissioning places for alternative provision. But she will be supported and advised by people from across the range of stakeholders. So we're inviting representatives from SPCN to get involved in that. We'll be inviting representatives from schools, from specialist provision, also from health services, and also from our care services. So the idea is that all of those people working together can provide really strong advice for the team that actually do the purchasing of those specialist placements, to make sure that our alternative provision is exactly what we need.
Excellent. Thanks, Judith. And Councillor Abbott, if you want to come in with anything, then just feel free to just interrupt. So is there any questions on that recommendation as such from anyone?
Yeah, can Pat be involved in that as well?
Judith, Jamie?
So we will be writing to the Parent Carer Network as the formal partner that is responsible for working with us on behalf of the DFE, if you see what I mean, on Parent Carer Networks. But if the representative, if the Parent Carer Network would like to work with PACT on coming up with a representative, then that's fine. We don't mind who the representative is, as long as they are able to represent the voice of parents across the county.
Yeah, because we would definitely like to be involved.
I'm sorry, Councillor Jones. So I'm sure, Claire, that SPCN and PACT can have a conversation.
Good, thank you.
Wonderful. So I'll just move on to recommendation 2. So recommendation 2 was that the range of pathways within the alternative provision offer should be expanded and clarified to include dual placements for pupils in key stages 1 to placements of various durations to meet the diverse needs of pupils attending alternative provision. So what we're looking at is a more sort of flexible pathways and varieties of in the offer that's provided. So historically, the expectation was that children attended on a full-time basis for 2 to 3 terms, apart from Key Stage 1 and 4 offers, with Key Stage 4 being more permanent places and Key Stage 1 on a part-time offer. However, sort of offering a range of flexible pathways with part-time options throughout key stages allows children and young people the opportunity to access provisions that is appropriate for their needs. So the potential of this approach was sort of reiterated in the PDP's discussions with Buckinghamshire and Lincolnshire, who have successfully created alternative provision systems with more graduated pathways. It's all more dynamic and successful in creating relationships with mainstream schools, and that's one of the really important things here, that it was the sort of the transition back into mainstream schools, but also that they were able to, if their needs were able to be met, that they could have a dual placement in the mainstream school as on a part-time offer, as well as the PRU on a right in saying that, Joe?
Helpful if I come in here just to maybe put a little bit more meat on the bones as well. I think that what we saw and what we experienced both locally and nationally was in Key Stage 1 in particular, where there's that shared responsibility and shared ethos between the mainstream school and the alternative provision. Whilst it wasn't always perfect, what we quite often saw was some good practice and some good sharing of informations, and actually on occasions young people going back into mainstream successfully. Not every time, but certainly more successes than failures in our experience. So that was probably the first aspect. I think the second aspect that Councillor Chambers touched upon with regards to Key Stage 4, and I think this was something that was echoed throughout discussions with whoever you met or whoever you talked to, was almost approaching a little bit of a cliff edge at the end of Key Stage 3, working into Key Stage 4, where young people didn't have the opportunity to go back into mainstream education because they were going to a Key Stage 4 setting that would be determined as being a destination, so they'd never have the opportunity to go back in. So I think it was really important from our perspective to offer children and young people the opportunity to have an element of flexibility that's to their needs. So to offer them the opportunity, if appropriate, to have the chance to go back into mainstream school at an earlier time. So maybe perhaps this historical model of having 2 to 3 terms in the PRU, which is appropriate for some, but isn't appropriate for all. So given the freedom and flexibility to do that, but also working really proactively with our local schools to have that sense of ownership and that sense of joint responsibility. We're actually sharing good practice and making sure that child and the family are right at the centre of those decisions and involving them in that. So there's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle here of different elements as you go through the recommendations that are linked in, but having that flexibility within the system should theoretically, and it's for us to put that into practice, give a lot more flexibility and a lot more opportunity for success. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So is there any questions on that at all? No, I'll move on. So recommendation 3 was around sort of part-time tables. So the introduction of a clear policy and guidance regarding the management of part-time timetables to ensure that all pupils progress to a full-time offer as soon as possible, given their needs as learners. So this was something I personally felt quite strongly about throughout when we started the PDP. I couldn't understand that, rightly or wrongly, the children, young people that were accessing alternative provision and were put on a part-time timetable, possibly by the provision themselves, wasn't in the best interests of a child. These are children who I believe probably needed more intensive help, and the worst thing in some of these cases, I'll come on to this in a moment, but in most cases they probably need more intensive work, not less. And so what we as a PDP recommended essentially was that we look at the individual needs of a child. So if that child, they may have good reason why they may have to have a part-time timetable, but but the alternative provision provider and the local authority work together in making sure that that's agreed between the two parties, and that this isn't just a decision by the alternative provision provider to place that child on a part-time timetable that possibly isn't in the best interest of that child as well. So there is now an SLA, a service level agreement, I believe, and I think Judith can go into more detail in a moment on that. But essentially, what we've said in this policy is that part-time timetables have to be agreed between the local authority and the service provider before being implemented, and there has to be good reason and evidence shown why this is in the best interest of that child. I don't know if Judith or Jamie has any more to say on that matter.
I think you've explained it really well, Chris. So unless there's any questions, I don't think we need to add anything.
Excellent. I'm getting good at this. Right. So is there any questions on that from anyone else at all?
I have actually got a comment from one of our parents who, what she said was, why are pupils in mainstream schools being left on part-time timetables in mainstream instead of arranging suitable provisions, resulting in children with SEN being treated less favourably?
This is going on in mainstream schools, is it?
Yes, it is. We have a parent whose child has been left on a part-time timetable for a considerable amount of time, who really could do with an alternative provision, but they're just being left on the part-time timetable.
And they don't have
So shall I come in?
Yeah, sorry, Judith, you carry on.
So thanks for that, Claire. We have the same view about part-time timetables for children who are in mainstream schools as who are in alternative provisions. They should only be used, as is the law, for short-term periods to enable a young person or a child who has some particular needs to be reintegrated, and there should be a clear end date for those part-time timetables. Now, the challenge for us is, Claire, that if a child's in a mainstream school and it's not necessarily brought to our attention that that's the case, we may not know, and therefore we can't provide the appropriate support to the parent to address it. So if you could advise the parent to make contact with us, okay, if the child is already open to family services, then they can make contact through family services. Otherwise, if you get in touch with me directly, so that's judith.mobs@suffolk.gov.uk, then I will put the parent in touch with the right people to support that conversation with the school. We are in a position for those children with education, health and care plans to be clearer about those who are on part-time timetables since the return to school, because we've used the COVID risk assessment as an opportunity to ask all schools to let us know how they're meeting the needs of children with plans given the COVID restrictions, and for them to tell us if they're not meeting those needs, and therefore the child is on a part-time timetable. So where we've become aware of that, we are working with the school and the family to address those issues and make sure it's appropriate. But unfortunately, if it's happening and the child doesn't have a plan, we won't necessarily know about it.
Right, okay, thank you. I'll pass that on.
You're on mute, Mary.
I'd really stress again, Claire, please advise PACT members if there's something that's not right for their child that's happening in the school. Let us know, because we can't champion that child if we're not sure, if we don't know what's going on in the mainstream schools, because obviously if we haven't heard about it, we can't hold the school to account, we can't do anything to support. So please always let us know. Thank you.
Excellent. So I'll just move on to the next recommendation. The completion of a review of the language used in the naming and description of our alternative provision sector. So this is something we felt there could be a stigma attached if on a child is attending a PRU or alternative provision, and what we want to do is just sort of remove that if at all possible. But we also felt that it probably wasn't our place to do that. So we've actually said in the recommendation that that the Alternative Provision Commissioning Board that I mentioned earlier on in recommendation 1 will actually oversee a review into this, and they will speak with young people that sort of in the sort of the alternative provision environment, shall I say, as well as mainstream schools and relevant people involved. Really, it's not my place to sort of, and nor should it be my place to think of a name, or if we need to change the name of that. So I think that's, I don't know if anyone has any questions on that, but I think it's fairly sort of brief really and quite easy. So I'll just move on to the next one. So the standardised set of alternative provision policies and protocols should be established across Suffolk so that everyone has a clear understanding of the offer and expectations on delivery partners. So this is probably, for me, the most important of the recommendations, and something I feel quite passionate about. Essentially, before the PDP, we found that there was a bit of a postcode lottery that depended on where you were in the county, depended on the school, the mainstream school that is, you may be able to place a child in alternative provision far easier than other schools elsewhere around the county. And this just basically wasn't acceptable, that we needed to put forward a standard set of policies and protocols that every school would have to go through in order to place a child in alternative provision. And when doing that, we had to establish a set of expectations on everyone, the mainstream school, the alternative provision provider, the child, the family. Everyone would be involved in what was expected of what was going to happen, and what everyone had to do in order to reach the goal. And that goal has to be that child goes back into mainstream school if their needs permit. And that's something that we've implemented. We spoke with, I'll go back to my visit to Lincolnshire. This is something what they call the ladder approach. Every school is made aware of what they have to do and to place a child in alternative provision, and I think that's only fair, really. So I don't know if anyone else, Jamie or Judith, has anything else to say on that.
Yeah, just very quickly, if it's okay. I think that part of that Chris touched upon there, in terms of that responsibility, both at the start of a placement of an alternative provision, and that sense of ownership. So everyone that's involved, in particular the parent, carer and the young person, are key to that, and they understand and are part of what's happening next. I think certainly some of the frustrations that we picked up during our visits and during our conversations was both across the piece, was a frustration because people didn't know what was happening next and who was doing what and when by. Which is really frustrating for families and for young people themselves. So that was something that we really wanted to address proactively. And I think the next step of that, in terms of that sense of ownership around ensuring, as you work as a team to support a young person back into mainstream, you've got clear dates and clear expectations by when. Now, those dates and expectations could change, but that's part of that discussion, and everyone knows what's happening and everyone's working towards the same goal. Is that fair to say, Councillor Chambers, Councillor Abbott?
Yeah. Excellent. Any questions from anyone on that? If not, okay, I'll move on to the next recommendation. So The recommendation 6, that the Alternative Provision Commissioning Board undertake a further review of the future need for alternative provision to meet medical needs in 2021, once the impact of the new specialist units programme and the current Radwell Trust Pathways pilot is better understood. So on this one, we've seen the sort of the impact that the new communication interaction units that are attached to mainstream schools are having on relieving some of the pressures on alternative provision. So it's, I mean, that's evidence that we've basically probably had, well, not probably, we have had children placed in alternative provision that shouldn't have been there and should have been in more specialist settings. So I think, and Judith can sort of provide a bit more information on this, but I believe we're going to be waiting for the commissioning board will undertake that review at the end of this academic year, I believe, once the Radwell Trust pilot has been reviewed. Is that fair to say, Judith?
Yes, that's right.
Excellent. Any questions on that? If not, great. And then I'll just move on to the last recommendation, which is for Suffolk County Council to continue with their commitment to the SEND capital programme to alleviate the pressures on alternative provision. And that's something that we absolutely are committed to. As I mentioned in the previous recommendation, we've seen firsthand what a big impact it's already had on relieving some of the pressures in the system. And as that advances on, it's part of a 5-year programme, so we're still in the very early stages of it, but already it's having a significant impact. And so therefore, you know, we are, as that programme advances, we'll continue to see the benefits, but it's never finished, it's never, you know, mission complete. We're always looking to continue to sort of improve our systems where it could be improved. And I think that's me. Councillor Abbott, I don't know if there's anything you want to add onto what I've just gone through at all.
No, nothing specifically on the recommendations. I think I would just reiterate one of the last points you just made there and say this by no means the end of the work that needs to happen. This is very much clearly the first steps, because I think that the lived experiences of a huge number of families will not improve overnight. We hope that this, combined with the new special educational needs places, will see a real big life-changing difference for a lot of families. But we recognise that these things are obviously structural in terms of things like the commissioning boards, in terms of part-time timetables, but there's a big culture change that needs to happen in the system as well, and that's, as well as kind of the schools, it's the Suffolk County Council in terms of how we commission places into PRUs and into special education needs provision. And I think it's really important that SPCN and PACT, obviously fantastic advocates for families and really hold the county's feet to the fire, schools' feet to the fire. And we need to continue the hard work in this area because, although we're confident, we're hopeful that these recommendations will start making a real difference to the system and to children and families, there is still a long way to go. So one of the things that we also asked the council to do when this was brought to Cabinet was to make sure that this is reviewed at fairly regular intervals. You may be aware that there's an education scrutiny committee that's going to be coming back, and I think that would be a really important forum to make sure that this is continues to be really high on the agenda in terms of special education needs and alternative provision. So, as I said, this is a really encouraging step forward, and I was pleased as an opposition, councillor to be able to work with the administration in a really kind of positive way, in a non-partisan way, and I think that's really important. The last thing I would just say as well is the process with which we did this. So it wasn't just kind of 6 councillors and a couple of officers stuck away in a room. The number of visits we've had over the past couple of years, as I say, not just with AAP, but with special education needs as well, has been phenomenal. I think on the first one, we did something like 30 visits. On this one, it was slightly less. And obviously, because of the pandemic, it was a little bit more patchy. Some of them were on virtual meetings, whatever. And not only did we meet with all the PRU heads, but we also met with other local authorities who are doing really good work in this area. As Jamie said, this is as well as being a really important thing in Suffolk we need to get right. This is a national issue as well. So we heard from other local authorities to see what they're doing and taking some of their good practice. And of course, you know, we met with SPCN and other families to really, as I say, underline what the system is like for families at the moment. And so all of that kind of knowledge as well. This wasn't, as I say, 6 councillors stuck away, you know, trying to work out what's best for the system. Kind of conversations and you know and visits as well, which really helped us kind of deliver these changes. And as I say, you know, this isn't the end. I'd hope and expect this will be, you know, built on and evolved as time goes on. So no, really important work, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it, and really invite any questions from families as well if they've got any.
If I could just come in there just to sort of cap that off, really. I mean, I think as well throughout this whole process, you know, as well as asking what the issues were, depending on who we're talking to and listening to what they may be, and then the policy was formed on that, but we also fed back throughout the whole process to the sort of alternative provision providers, mainstream schools, and sort of, you know, spoke to them and said, this is what we're kind of thinking on. Would this sort of fix some of the problems? And there's always that sort of conversation ongoing. It wasn't just a case of here's my problems, you know, list of problems. And we would go away and come back, you know, sort of 6 months later or 3 months later, whatever it was, and there you go. This is what we think. You know, throughout the whole process, it was very much a discussion rather than sort of us dictating what actually this is what we're going to do, and you know, like it or lump it. But so it was very much a discussion, and there was constant feedback going backwards and forwards on what we were sort of formulating, really. Mary?
I wanted to come in after what Jack just said and utterly agree with him. We have to have a cultural change in Suffolk in the way we approach the delivery of services for our SEND children. And that starts with all of us, but particularly I think we've got to improve the inclusiveness in our mainstream schools. We've got to challenge our mainstream schools to be more inclusive. It is not always as straightforward as it might sound, because of course so many of them are academies, but we've got a very good sort of SENCO in Izzy Collins working with SENCOs across the county, and their support sessions, their sort of the networking sessions she's holding are becoming more and more popular when she's describing to SENCOs ways of addressing problems, ways of responding to things, so that we're getting that message out of how schools can do much more to be inclusive. But you know, I totally recognise there's a long way to go, because to get full inclusion in every school is always it's another person to talk to, it's another person to talk to, it's talking to the governors, it's talking to the school staff, in fact it's talking sometimes to all the parents, to what we can all do to support families. But that is the aim that we've got. It's as Chris said, it's not going to be achieved overnight, and we know there'll always be more to do, because the demands are so great and the pressures on families are so great, but we will determined to step up on this. Do we now move on to the next section? Okay, so I'll start with that, and Chris can maybe describe, because Chris led this section that we're going to now is the talking about the specialist places we're now creating, and that came out of the first PDP that Chris led. As I think I told you, we reintroduced policy development panels in 2018, and Chris led one of the first ones, and that was looking at the number of places we've got. So we've now created that policy development panel. Thanks, Jamie, for putting out that slide. That policy development panel came up with recommendations for a very radical programme. It's £45 million to be spent creating about just over 800 new specialist places. So we got it's delivered its first tranche of 210 new places, which started in September. That's 11 new specialist units and the Sir Bobby Robson School. And then for the next September, there'll be a further 260 new places with 12 new specialist units, 30 more places at the Sir Bobby Robson School, and a new communication and interaction school at Bungay. And then in September 2022, there'll be another 2 more new schools in Ipswich and Bury St Edmunds, and then it'll go on. And we will, but September, I think 2023, will have completed a network of units and schools by age and SEND type across Suffolk, delivering a total of 692 places. And that point was to do a check to see that we're on track and what else might be needed. This list gives you, and we had tried to do it as a more of an interactive map, but I think technology was the better of us. But we'll upload this, or you'll be able to upload this list so parents can look at it in your own time. The response we're getting already to those units that opened this September is incredibly positive from parents who are seeing the difference in their children. And one of the things we wanted to do is make as many of these units as possible attached to mainstream schools. So those children going into the unit are part of a mainstream school in general, that's a mainstream setting. And there are benefits for them in being part of that group. And of course, parents can take both their children, maybe they got more than one child, into school together, so the family can work together on that. I think it's really quite a brief section. I don't know if Chris wants to add any more, and then we can get more onto the work on permanent exclusions. Either Chris or Jack want to add anything, or anyone wants to ask a question. I can't now really see people because we've got the table up on the screen. So if anyone wants to use the raise a hand function to ask anything, do please go ahead.
I've certainly got nothing else to add, Mary. So I will. I'll see. There's a question actually come through. So.
Anne's got a question, I think.
I have got a question, and both Jamie and Judith will be expecting my question. So obviously in the north of the county, it's good to see that we've got some provision there, because that has been lacking. Obviously, looking at the list there, we're still missing communication and interaction at Key Stage 2 and at Key Stage 3 and 4. So would it be possible to provide some assurance of what work is going on to try and fill those gaps?
I'll pass over to them, but they are scoping the whole time to see where we are and where we need to go. It's a map that goes forward, but we're always checking to see that we're taking everything forward. But I'm sure Judith and Jamie will fill us in now.
Yes, so thank you for that. I'll start, and then I'll let Jamie talk about the work he's doing in the north of the county, working with our mainstream schools. I mean, we have been disappointed not to have more interest from the north of the county, although it is now beginning to come through, and it's really good to see Alton Broad coming online, and also SET Beccles as well, which is a good start. On the and you'll see where we've got gaps in terms of units is that, as you've rightly pointed out, communication interaction across Key Stage 2 to 4, and then cognition and learning at Key Stage 2. So what we've done for the sort of short to medium term is find other strategies to plug those gaps. So Ashley School will take another 12 pupils, which will help us in terms of plugging that gap until the work that Jamie's doing comes to fruition. And actually, what we probably should have in those two blanks that are on there for communication interaction is the new school at Bungay, because actually that will be plugging the gaps around Key Stage 2, 3 and 4 while we're actually securing unit provision. And that school will take 40 pupils in its first year, so actually will take more than units would have been able to take in one go. It will take another 40 in its second year. And then we have got the option to expand that school further if we cannot identify appropriate mainstream schools to take on units. But I would just say, before we focus in on the northern area particularly, what's been really heartening to me is that actually we have got such good progress around the units that have opened in terms of the impact they're having for the whole school, that we are confident that other schools will recognise the benefit and want to come forward later in the programme. And then the other point I would make is, of course, we do have communication and interaction unit at Key Stage 3-4 in Saxmundham Free School, which, although it isn't going to be particularly convenient for Lowestoft, will help to serve some of that Waveney area.
If I was just to come in there to pick up on what Judith was saying, so yes, I think I did expect the question, Anne, in terms of our support in the north of the county, and I think where we've probably made some inroads in recent months has been perhaps a change in approach from us in terms of our method of communicating with schools in that part of the world. Certainly what I've tried to do with my team is to have far more one-to-one conversations with head teachers in the Lowestoft and surrounding areas, partly to promote the progress that's been made that Judith touched upon in terms of the units that have already opened and the success that they've experienced, so to perhaps provide some reassurance in that regard. But also to perhaps address some of the maybe the misconceptions that are out there in terms of funding or expectations around what will be delivered, and actually having those proactive one-to-one conversations, and on occasions linking into the work that Izzy Connell's done as well, and Claire Darwin in terms of the graduated approach, has actually seen us have a lot more success and make a lot more inroads. I wouldn't say that we are there yet, but certainly since September we've had far more interest from schools in that part of the world that want to proactively work with us, which I think is a real step in the right direction. But again, I wouldn't say it's the finished article, but we're certainly moving in the right direction.
Thanks, Jamie.
Newt, any questions from anybody else at all? You've got the timetable absolutely spot on this, I think, haven't you? And so I think we'll now move on to the work on permanent exclusions, if that's appropriate. Thank you. As I think everybody here is aware, permanent exclusions, particularly of SEND pupils, became a significant problem last year where our numbers doubled. One of the things that happened as a result of COVID was that Ofsted stopped doing its inspections and seconded staff out to local authorities. And we in Suffolk had several Ofsted inspectors who came to us, and we asked one who's experienced inspector to scope out for us what an inquiry into the root cause of what the problems are with permanent exclusions in Suffolk should be, what we needed to find out. And this was done, and we've now got a former HMI inspector, schools inspector, leading this inquiry, and he's going through it. It involves looking at all the data and looking at case studies, talking to the schools, and that's something I want to put in now, a request to PACT and the Suffolk Parent Carer Network, and he'll be reporting into so early in the new year. Now, when we set up this work, we were very clear. We wanted not just to hear the voice from the professionals, we absolutely had to hear the voice from the children and their parents. And a list of sort of cases that looked very representative were put forward to be case studies. So far, we've been quite disappointed that there are a number of parents have not responded, and so we're asking parents, please take part in our inquiry. Please come and talk to John about your experience, and they're not responding. So if we're going to be putting out an appeal, probably approaching all 152 parents shortly. Please support your members if they have had their child that was excluded last year to come forward, because we need to know that lived in experience. Now, one of the things that came up when we were talking very recently, and Jack was part of that conversation at the SEND Oversight Board, is how are we picking up those young people who are going in fixed term exclusion, which is almost a trajectory down to permanent exclusion. That's the sort of experience we were hoping to pick up from the case studies. And if we're not going to get a good sample of case studies, we will not get that information. At every turn, we want to support parents. And I quite understand, because I've had some, I'd say, heartbreaking conversations with 2 or 3 parents who've contacted me about their children's exclusions. It must be, I can't imagine how difficult it is as a parent to take that shock in yourself and to support your child. But we need you to be able to share that with us, please, so we can make sure that we get the work in, do the inclusive work with the schools. We can hold the schools to account. We can move things forward and hopefully make things better. Interestingly, there was a lot of work, I think you probably realised, done and advice from Ofsted and from across the sector, starting at the start of this term, about the need for schools to be very understanding about their pupils' emotional needs when they return to school, because Suffolk particularly has a high proportion of young people, a very high proportion of young people excluded for permanent for persistent disruptive behaviour. Now, interesting in Suffolk, we've the number of exclusions for this first half of term is considerably lower than the same time last year, and it's not so highly there's not such a high proportion of SEND pupils involved, so that's interesting. But there are still pockets and pockets we've got to deal with and we've got to address, because I think it's about 26, isn't it, Judith? But 5 from one school. So what is going on there? We need to be addressing that with the school. So the picture has just changed, and this first half term is not obviously representative, because it's been so pressurized, and there have been efforts made by our schools and obviously efforts made by our educational psychologists. But we want to be able to make sure that there's early intervention with a young person who's facing their fixed term exclusion, to keep them at the brink before they tip over the edge and into permanent exclusion. So that sort of explains that, I hope. I don't know if Judith will probably tidy up my answer and give you some more informed detail.
So perhaps I can just say a little bit more about the early intervention work, because I think all of us would want support to be available to a child or young person right at the beginning of the time that their additional needs are identified, rather than having to wait until things get really difficult and we're into fixed term exclusions or permanent exclusions. So just to say a little bit more about that, because we've been trying to focus more on that end of the journey most recently. So we've introduced something last June called the graduated response, the SEND graduated response. And the purpose of that is to make sure that everybody in the system is really clear about the steps they should be taking to support a child or young person who has additional needs. Now, the graduated response is nothing magical or special. It's basically just a really clear description of what is already in the code of practice, but perhaps turning that into something that's a bit more easy to follow for busy parents, and also something that I hope will help parents and carers, but is also there for busy teachers. So basically what that's saying is, the first thing obviously is for teachers to ensure that they're going through that assess, plan, do, review cycle. And we often find at that point is when things are going wrong, because perhaps a teacher or a SENCO hasn't really stopped and just reflected on what's happening, and why perhaps a child or young person is demonstrating the behaviour they are. Perhaps there is an underlying reason for that, which might be they are trying to avoid something they find difficult or scary or frustrating. So that early plan, do, review, assess, plan, do, review cycle is really important. Obviously, sometimes SENCOs and other professionals are going to need help around that. So we've now set up a SENCO helpline, which is open every day of the week, so that SENCOs have got much quicker help, immediate help as to how to access our systems. And we're finding that that's popular. We also want to make sure that there's more opportunity for schools to bring forward cases where they think perhaps they need a bit more help. There might be something going wrong that they haven't come across before. They might feel they need a little bit of help from health or from social care, as well as from education teams. And so we've introduced SEND consultations. So they're a sort of second step in our graduated response from that early sort of quality first teaching that we'd expect all our schools to be providing as a matter of course. Those consultations are proving popular, and we are doing our best to meet the demand for them. And our teachers and head teachers and SENCOs are saying they're making a real difference and really helping. I've already mentioned as well the EHC needs risk assessments that we've put in place this term to make sure that we're asking schools what adjustments are they making for children who've already got an education, health and care plan, and making sure that we follow up where we're worried that a service isn't in place, or perhaps there is a part-time timetable, and making sure we keep an oversight of that. So that's another part of our early intervention. And we also have, we've had a parent line that's run until half term, because we were worried particularly about providing support for families with the return to school after the very long period away. but we want to continue to offer support for parents and families. So in addition to the local offer helpline, which is one way to get access to ask questions about services for parents, there's also an attendance line as well. We're very happy to take calls via the local authority attendance line if parents have got worries about an offer that's being made. So across the board, we're trying to make sure that there's much more focus on what happens early in the journey. And as Councillor Evans mentioned as well, that's also being supported by more training for staff in schools so that they're aware about what's available and they feel confident with the information they're getting in terms of it being up to date. So I think that's back to you for questions, Anne.
It certainly is. Has anybody got any questions?
Here comes Claire.
Yeah, I've just got something from a parent which has kind of been answered, but I will read it anyhow in case there's anything else you want to add. There were high exclusions from a small group of schools, and urgent problems were identified in Schools Forum 2014. These problems have got considerably worse. What reassurances can we have that the council will deliver something on this time?
I think one thing that's important is we've actually got this really good scoping document that's gone right into what's happening where, and it's gone over. It's looking back a bit and looking forward. The other is I think we've got the work with our with Izzy Collins and the Senkos. And we've also got the work, we're going to have the parents, we very much hope, contributing so we can chart that story of what happens to a child and how we need to get in so much earlier. The earlier the work, the better, to stop the slip from fixed term exclusion to permanent exclusion.
Judith, did you want to come in?
Yes, Claire, I just wanted to check, did you mean 2014 or did you mean 2019?
What the parent wrote was 2014.
Right.
They might have made a typo. I'm not really sure.
Okay, because we certainly discussed at Schools Forum about exclusions in 2019. So I'm wondering if that's what they're talking about.
Could be, yeah.
And so I just wanted to explain that the conversations we had in Schools Forum at that time, where we were reporting the challenges around permanent exclusions being high, that's what's led to the scoping report that Councillor Evans has been explaining about. So that's a direct response. Okay, and then obviously as a response, so the PDP report we talked about at the beginning, I think already changes things to some degree, but we're expecting there to be some further recommendations in January out of the permanent exclusions work, the scoping inquiry that's going on now. And we will obviously implement those once they are agreed. So there'll be some very clear action as a result of that, in addition to the things we've described today.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Judith. Has anybody else got any questions? Claire, you haven't got any more?
I have a couple more questions, but these are actually on off-rolling, basically. So do you want those now or do you want to wait?
Yeah, we can take them now, that's fine.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so it's kind of one question in two parts almost. Why is the council not holding figures on off-rolling? In a recent FOI, they said they intend to deal with it. How if they aren't monitoring it? And also, will Suffolk County Council publish data they have collected from parents who have deregistered their children on the reasons why they are home educating? The forms are quite detailed now, so there should be an accurate picture.
Judith, are you happy to start on that one? Or do you want to come in?
I'd start if Claire didn't mind. I was going to say, part of the problem, I think, Claire, is we don't always know. I mean, no school's going to say, hang on, we've off-rolled 10 children this term. It is very difficult. I know that we ran at one stage a sort of whistleblower helpline phone number with SPCN. I gather it didn't get a huge number of calls. Personally, as a councillor, I'm really pleased that when I sat on the old Education Scrutiny Committee, we made the recommendation that Ofsted should start really investigating, when it does a report, how many children have left the school roll recently, and have the ability to go and follow up those parents. That is the way to find. That's one way to really find out. Schools can't hide it, but it's. Judith can carry on with more of the details, but it's very difficult to know something that's to know something that's hidden. It's a bit like we don't know all the people who are elective home educating, because people will move into the county educating their children and not need to tell us about it. So it is that bit of getting people to come and tell us, and we quite understand some parents don't want to tell us because they're frightened of maybe if they've got another child still in the school of how the school is going to react. But Judith will carry on with some of the details. But the more information we get about off-rolling, the more we can challenge schools. We do not condone it. It is not the thing that should be done at all.
So absolutely, just to echo what Councillor Evans is saying there, we do not condone off-rolling at all, and wherever we are aware that a child has been inappropriately removed from a role, we will challenge that. Our big challenge is knowing. And
no, I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop just there a moment. My daughter was off-rolled and the council didn't do anything whatsoever, and I actually told them.
Well, we aren't going to discuss on a recorded webinar an individual case, but if you want to take it up with me afterwards, Claire, I'd be more than happy to discuss an individual case with you.
I'm just saying, as a parent myself who has experienced it firsthand, I know that nothing happened. I don't need to discuss personally mine right now, but I know that I'm not alone. We've got lots of parents in this situation. The council actually are not doing anything when parents are saying that their children have been off-rolled. And I have to make that clear to you that is actually happening.
Okay, well, as I say, I'm not going to comment on an individual case now, but I can say that we will always try to do our best to avoid that situation if we've got clear evidence that we can challenge on in relation to an off-rolling situation. Ofsted are also really clear about that, as Councillor Chambers has mentioned, and we would do everything we could where we were aware that that was going on to bring that to the attention of Ofsted as well. So we absolutely want children to be in school and to have the opportunity to learn.
So Claire, if PACT have got lots of members who have been off-rolled, could PACT provide the local authority with figures from members in the last 12 months of the numbers that have been off-rolled?
I can certainly arrange to have a survey and see what we can find out.
Yeah,
but you know, it is something that is a problem, and I know these forms that we get when we home educate our children, they are quite detailed, so the information is going back. It's just that we don't see anything at all happening, and we do, and I speak for myself, but some others, is that actually to call it elective home education is kind of a little bit insulting to the parents that have actually been forced into that situation, because we haven't elected it. It's actually that we haven't been given a choice.
Absolutely, and I guess that's why on, for example, our annual survey, we have electively home educated and we have non-electively.
Yeah.
So there is, I'm just going to put you on mute for a second, Claire, because I've got a bit of feedback. So hang on just 1 minute, Mary. I will bring you in just a minute. So I guess for so I guess what you're saying is that, or what I'm hearing is that the information is often, so you put that information onto the home education forms that you fill in, and so that's where the information is going back to the local authority. So that's something that certainly we could pick up, the local authority could pick up and have a look at, but it would be really helpful. So if you could look at in the last 12 months, numbers who have been off-rolled and numbers who have informed the local authority that they've been off-rolled, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Mary, you were going to come in, and then I know Jack wants to come in.
Yeah, I was going to say to Claire, if it would help, please come and arrange, and we can have a private meeting. Obviously, we're you know, this is going to be broadcast or recordable, but if you'd like to come and talk to me separately, I'd be very happy to meet you.
Jack.
Thanks, Anne. No, just really quickly, I think it's probably worth mentioning that obviously this issue has come up a number of times. I know SPCN and PACT have been campaigning on not just off-rolling, but elective and inverted commas homeschooling and exclusions. And it came up this time last year, I seem to remember, or slightly before that as well, because I think there was some news articles about the fact that the county knew who some of the schools were about off-rolling, and they said appropriate action was being taken. I think the frustration is, and I know what you're trying to say, Claire, is that it feels like for many families they don't get listened to. That their lived experiences, as I say, are not listened to, and no appropriate action is taken afterwards. That's certainly how it feels to some families, and I get that. I think the things that I would say is, after the back of that kind of those news stories last year, there was what's called a task and finish group set up into homeschooling who looked specifically at this issue. Again, you know, they made a series of kind of findings and recommendations that we need to really push forward. I hear what Mary's saying. It's a tricky subject, because ultimately, if you're in an academy, the authority doesn't really have much opportunity to intervene now. It's regional schools commissioners in Ofsted who will really be able to drive this stuff through. But the one bit I would depart on is, I think we can spot where certain schools are probably committing acts of off-rolling, however we want to describe it. We're seeing that, as Mary alluded to, about how many kids start at the beginning of the school year and how many of them finish it. But I would say that I think I felt, as an opposition councillor, and I don't often say this, I felt a change in the past year in how the authority is dealing with off-rolling and exclusions. I think the homeschooling task force shows that. I think after years of battling away from SPCN, PACT and others, that you know, an investigation into exclusions is now happening as well. So I guess, and it alludes to one of your earlier questions, Claire, is how can families feel that we as an authority will keep to our promises? I think we're seeing the work happening now. I think if you look at the special educational needs provision, they are delivering on that quite rapidly and quite significantly, and I think that will have real big impacts. But the real proof in the pudding will be is that when we start seeing exclusion numbers fall, then when we start seeing home education or elective home educators families on the wane, and that's when we know, you know, proper action is being taken and it's working. But that's got to be a constant process, and as Mary said, it is a really difficult thing to get a handle on, because obviously schools aren't going to put in red shining lights, hey, we're excluding kids, we're off-rolling kids or whatever. So it's really critical that through SPCN, through PACT, that we continue making those representations to the county council and really underline what the lived experiences of families are, so they can investigate. And you're more than right to criticise if you haven't been listened to in the past, but I hope, as I say, I've seen a sea change in the last 6 to 12 months from the council in that kind of, in the sort of culture we've been talking about throughout this call. So again, I really urge you to get involved in that exclusions piece of work that's been doing as well, but also more off-rolling cases as well. I think that's really important.
Thank you, Jack. Mary? You're still on mute.
Done it again. I'm muting too much today. Yeah, thank you, Jack. The other thing I was going to say, Claire, is we are looking to, I think we told you, we'll be restarting the Children's Services and Education Scrutiny Committee. And I just hope that's going to be a more vibrant committee than it used to be. And I hope that I would love to think there would be a session on elective home education off-rolling, where we actually had somebody from the Regional Schools Commissioner in that room, and we had somebody from a couple of the academies with the highest number of, say, exclusions in the room, where they could be held to account by the committee. I very much hope we will have wider representation. We used to, on the old Children's Services and Education Scrutiny Committee, have representatives, educational representatives, one from the diocese, the Catholic diocese, one from the Anglican diocese, and a couple of parent governors. I hope that we will probably have some parent representative, and I'd really much hope we have a young person's representative, either somebody probably from one of our MYPs, members of the Youth Parliament, so that committee gets the input from people who are living the service, you know, the parents, the carers, and the young people. And I very much hope is if we do get to that stage, that PACT and SPCN will play a full part so that we can hold our education system to account, we can see where things can be improved, and we can see where praise can be given, that people are making progress, and where we can all cooperate and collaborate to improve our services.
Thank you, Mary. Any more questions from anybody? So Claire, you're happy to take away as an action for Pat to just get some figures? Is that all right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll look into that and see what we can come up with.
That'd be really helpful.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
You're on mute still, Mary.
And do email me if you want a meeting. Yeah.
So I guess it just leaves me to thank everybody, so county councillors, council officers and parents for coming. We will make this recording available and put it up so that our members can access it. And as Mary said at the beginning, hopefully this is the first of a few more of these, which to connect with parents in a different way. So thank you very much for your time, everybody.
Well, thank you for arranging it, please, Anne. Very helpful. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Take care.
Take care. Have a
Bye-bye.
good afternoon.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.